Thank you, everyone, for joining. So, my topic for today, the first session, is going to be why site reliability engineering is critical for any organization. So, I know a lot of organizations that we are working as part of consulting coaching have been from financial services, telecom companies, insurance. Um, we have automotive companies. We have companies around the world in different domains. And for all product companies, there is no second thought to think about SRE because reliability becomes a very important aspect. So when I and Yogesh were discussing about it, we said that we want to bring value to this overall community of site reliability engineering practitioners, but also make sure that some of these learnings that you're going to have in the conference that you can go back and apply in your workplace, because that's going to be a very important conversation, in my opinion, that is at the aim of Thinknyx and Top Solutions to present today. Now, from an agenda perspective, we will talk about the introduction, the site reliability introduction. Just in case if you're very new to the world of site reliability engineering, we want to make sure that you have the basic fundamentals covered quickly. Then we'll talk a little bit about principles and practices that are applicable in the world of site reliability engineering. We'll just highlight about some of those roles and responsibilities as you start seeing through, because this becomes a very important aspect in many organizations, because a lot of people think that the operations team has got a certain set of responsibilities. Let's also do the same thing with SRE, but then the competencies, the skill sets are kind of different. So we're going to talk a little bit about skills and competencies that we are going to require to become a good site reliability engineering. A lot of time people ask why SRE? Is it a new kid on the block? Is it on a hype curve? So we thought we would bring in that perspective of what is the demand for site reliability engineering, right? Because in the last 4 years, as we have seen a lot of customers globally, we want to highlight why there is a huge demand on site reliability engineering and why you should be excited if you're already embarking on the journey of site reliability engineering for you as an individual or for your organizations to get maximum value. Because at the end of the day, it's about delivering business value to your customers. And if you are trying to think about making your career in site reliability engineering, what's the logical steps that you want to go forward in the direction and make it matter, right? So it's a pretty solid set of agenda that I want to cover in the next 40 minutes. And I hope that we will take the questions after during the designated time. So please keep a note of your questions. We would be more than happy to address your questions, but for now, we will continue with the flow. I hope that you will find that more meaningful. So I'm not seeing on the chat window, so if someone can tell me from the experience profile of the audience here, how many of you are new to SRE and how many of you have understood some basic principles of SRE? Can someone tell me? If you've already posted on the comment section. Okay, let it keep it coming as we go through this. So a little bit of background. I lead Top Solutions as the managing director in India, Singapore, and the US. I'm also the global ambassador of the DevOps Institute and co-author of Site Reliability Engineering Practitioner and Observability from the DevOps Institute. I've been a speaker and a leader speaking in evangelizing the world of DevOps, Site Reliability Engineering. Overall, 22 years in the industry. Started off as a software developer in Java J2E, and then moved into IT service management, IT governance, organizational change management, business relationship management. But the last 8 years, as we started the Top Solutions, we've been primarily focusing on DevOps, site reliability engineering to a greater extent. I've had the opportunity to speak in 12 international conferences before, and I'm also I was awarded the ITSM Contributor of the Year 2013 by ITSM of Singapore. I'm also very glad to and honored to be one of the top 25 thought leaders in service management by HDI USA for 3 consecutive years, and I was a recipient of 4 Excellence Awards. One of the things that gets me really humbling experiences when you work with like-minded people around the world who are practitioners, right? Hands-on practitioners in doing site reliability engineering. So I've been working with this cohort for 6 months to build a site reliability engineering practitioner course, and I will talk a little bit about resources that you can tap later. We also looked at, as an SRE, we need to move away from monitoring to observability, and that's the second session that I would be talking after Yogesh presentation. So keep a note of the aspect of observability, because that's becoming a lot more important these days as we shift gears from monitoring to observability aspect. So let's start with making the first statement. As every organizations around the world embark on digital transformation, I want to ask you, are we making the desirable shift? Now, when I say, are we making desirable shift, what do I mean? Are we being IT focused or are we being business focused? Now, in a traditional IT focused world, we focused on uptime, availability. We looked at SLAs, right? Service level agreements. Uh, we also looked a little bit about reliability and resilience, because that's one of the key parameters of site reliability engineering approach. Now, as part of reliability and resilience, we focused on, okay, you have a set of monitoring tools in place that will give you some feedback on how this needs to be arranged. And if something goes down, you will be able to recover back the service. But today, the world is changing so much dramatically. Customers have got a lot more access to resources, to technology, and they're pretty savvy, right? And I always tell people that if you want to deliver business value to your customers, you need to be at least 2 levels above your customers. That means your level playing field is getting shorter and shorter. You don't have a lot of margins in how we are seeing this moving forward. So we need to focus on business value. So today I'll talk a lot of CEOs around the globe, and I ask them, how's IT doing? They say, you know what? We have two problems with IT. Number one, IT talks the language of jargons that just goes over the head. And they also come during the budgeting season, they get the money and they disappear. So sometimes a lot of organizations are struggling to identify the value that they're going to get from IT. So all of you who are attending this conference, we need to ask this question. The business today doesn't care about whether you're doing DevOps, Agile, Lean, IT service management, site reliability engineering. They don't care about it, right? All they care about it is, what is the profitability? How is the market share going across? What is the value that I'm kind of realizing as part of this whole exercise? So I think for you and for the entire audience here, I want to request you to start thinking from shifting gears from IT focus to business value focus. Remember, we are serving the business. So our conversation has to be more focused on the business value aspect of it. So let's set a context of what is site reliability engineering in a quick summary, right? In the earlier world, we used to do waterfall way of working, right? We have the design, build, test, deploy, which was pretty sequential in nature. That makes a lot more sense. Now, in 2001, we had the Agile Manifesto came, which brought about the minimum viable products. It looked at about observation. It's about bringing in quick feedback loops and iterative improvement. So that made total sense, because we want to show something that was valuable for customers. So we focused on something called velocity, right? Velocity is the number of users, stories, or story points that is released within a sprint of 2 to 4 weeks. I hope you are well aware of that. Now, after we had the agile approach, we are still struggling, because I still remember when I used to manage large IT operations, the development team used to release features, and the operations team was struggling, because every time there was a new release, the system became unstable, right? How many of you can relate with that situation where the operations team is asking for stability, right? While the development team is focusing on new features, new areas that I want to deploy and get value out of it. So the whole premise of working towards velocity and stability was the genesis of what DevOps came into picture, right? To a stat, 2001 was agile way of working, which is the Agile Manifesto. 2009, the word DevOps was coined in the Velocity conference, and there was a person called Patrick DeBois who coined the term called DevOps. So while Agile was focusing on velocity, faster releases, DevOps was focusing on velocity and stability, right? So keeping the lights on, whatever you call as business as usual, was also one of the prerogatives of keeping it tight. But then there came a point where we just focused on stability. The world wanted to have reliability and resilience. Now, what is the definition of reliability? The definition of reliability means the ability of a system or an application to perform its desired function without undergoing failure. So the whole premise is that we need to make sure that the system works as designed. For example, you're driving a Mercedes Benz. You're driving on a highway and suddenly you get stuck and the car gets broken down and you cannot move further. Now that's not going to be helpful, right? So in service management world, we call about fit for purpose, which is utility, and fit for use, which is your warranty aspect, your availability, capacity, continuity. So how reliable your systems are applying. The next part is about resilience, right? If something goes wrong, like I talk with a lot of CIOs and ask them, what is their biggest nightmare? And they say, Suresh, our biggest nightmare is all unplanned outages. So how do you ensure that you're able to have a peaceful night, even about deployments? I was talking to a few of the clients in the US, and I was asking them, do you even deploy on Fridays? They said that, oh, we don't want to spoil our weekend. We do it on a Thursday because guess what? Most of the times your releases are having some issues that we need to troubleshoot across. So people are looking at site reliability engineering to focus on reliability and resilience. I hope that gives you a set of context of how we have evolved from waterfall to agile to DevOps and SRE. Now, doing SRE at the fag end of the life cycle after it goes live doesn't make any sense. So our focus is to look at site reliability engineering throughout the life cycle. What does it mean? So if you look at the overall life cycle of design, build, release, post-release, shifting left, right? Bringing in the SREs earlier in the life cycle to focus on aspect of reliability requirements. So for example, like the fit for purpose and fit for use, you should also provide non-functional requirements as an input that comes from the design phase. Because as you start to do your architectural design, if you start understanding the reliability requirements, you are able to address it more meaningfully. Then we have the build process where one of the key aspects is to look at error budgets. Now, the concept of error budget is to do experimentation because a lot of times we don't have opportunity to experiment. How many of the times you've seen that, hey, do not touch it. Everything is working perfectly in production. But we need to allow people to experiment. So we need to give opportunities to, experiment. Then releasing, the earlier world, we used to do big bang releases, right? If something breaks, you need to roll back the entire patch. Now, with all these micro services and micro releases, you can release a small set and release it to a small set of users, like canary deployments, because it reduces the overall risk of deployments. And post-release, we can start looking at what's very important. How do I prioritize the end-to-end life cycle? Now, for me, the benefit of engaging SRE is basically it prevents rework, right? It gives you the wisdom of production. Generally, what happens is when someone is deploying into production based on the user experience, the operations team has got a lot of insights of what's going on, what's working. So that could help us to design things better and get things done. So the point of contention here is that site reliability engineers should be involved throughout the life cycle because that's the only way that we can look at reliability as a first-class citizen, right? So you asked this question about whether your reliability is a first-class citizen. That means each and everybody in the value chain will have to start thinking about how do I ensure my reliability and resilience is taken care throughout the journey without hassles. Now, we do a lot of research, and one of the reports from the upskilling report of DevOps Institute brought in the top reasons for site reliability engineering adoptions globally. If you look at 68% of the people who are interviewed mentioned that one of the top reasons that they wanted SRE to be adopted was to reduce the risk of service failure or unplanned downtime. I think we talked about this very much because it's a nightmare, right? And nobody wants to have a nightmare. And the second part was improved organizations' ability to compete with improved reliable service and offerings. Today, your customers have got a choice, right? cost is no longer an arbitrator. People people are willing to pay a premium when they see substantial value coming to the table. But the important is that reliability becomes a first class citizen, right? Because today we live in a world where we are in attention deficit syndrome. Even if 1 minute of downtime, people start trolling you on social media, right? So people want everything available 24 cross 7, 365 days without any performance degradation. So that is why organizations are starting to understand we cannot do this alone, right? It's just not about DevOps. We need to have something that combines development, build, test, operations together and see how we can make that reliability a continuous spectrum, right? Now, what are the elite organizations focusing on? This is from the Catchpoint report of 2022. It was very interesting to ask how balanced are they from a reliability standpoint, right? Are they focusing on external, which is more of customer-facing product services? Are they focusing on internal tools and systems? And when they did the analysis of high-performing organizations, so if you look at this graph from low-performing, medium, high-performing, elite performing, we saw that about 36 percentage of companies are starting to see more towards reliability focus, right? So percent of elite performing organizations with a substantial external queue have been doing really well. And then low performing, they have never focused on the external queue because your customers are going to be ruthless, right? They want everything on time, uh, a few milliseconds, right? Today we look at UPI transactions, right? Any payment transactions that we are doing it, we want to have it instantaneously. Nobody wants to go through an NEFT, RTGS transactions or mobile banking transactions because we don't have patience. With that said in mind, with we have multiple concurrent users and looking at events like Thanksgiving week or Black Friday, you need to be absolutely responsive, right? So organizations that focus heavily on the external reliability focus seem to be performing well. So it's a question of you asking this question back to your organizations. Where are you focusing on? Because today the site reliability engineering is not just focusing on reliability, it's focusing on customer experience. And we will talk a little bit about the shift from SLA to SLO because today customers experience is changing over a period of time, right? What was experience great yesterday is no longer relevant today. It is just moving, shaping gears. So we need to be thoughtful and be open and receptive to understand the user experience to a lot of extent. I hope this two slides gave you a little bit of a perspective of the reasons for SRE adoption, as well as the organizations that focus on customer experience. Now, we did talk about a lot of organizations around the world are doing digital transformation, and we all know that COVID has accelerated the digital transformation journey. So I want to talk about four key boxes that I think every organizations today are working upon to deliver astounding customer experience. The first one is around product management, right? So every organizations are looking at moving from a project mindset to a product mindset, right? Because products are long lived. We're looking at squads, pods, tribes that could be part of that equation for a longer period of time. And the next aspect is around user experience. And user experience is not about UI alone, like user interface alone, but it's also about the devices that we use because we are talking about the APM tools and we are looking at the various aspects that will help us to measure at every device level. So to create the product management, new features, functionality, and ensure user experience, you need to have two key blocks. DevOps, because it automates your CI/CD pipeline from the code commit, build, test, deploy, but also bring in that level of reliability from the left to right. So for me, if you are focusing on building a customer experience engineering, right? We call it as experience engineering. And even if you're a service-based company, you look at some level of product development, your application development, you need to start looking at beyond customer satisfaction to what we call as your net promoter score. But DevOps and site reliability engineering could be a huge block put together in tandem to desirably deliver world-class experience. I hope that gives you a context of why SRE is getting more important. So this is a great graph for people to understand. This is from a person called Mike Dickerson. He talks about how to build site reliability hierarchy. And when he was asked, what are the steps that we need to do to build world-class reliability? It starts at the bottom with monitoring, right? And we're going to talk, we're going to hear from Yogesh on Prometheus, right? So the monitoring stack is going to be your fundamental, because if you don't get that right, then reliability goes out of the window. Then how quickly are you able to respond to incidents? Because today we are looking at workarounds. But how many of the incidents can be auto-remediated, right? Can we do a self-healing and auto-remediation option, like runbook, playbooks, and stuff like that? How quickly or effectively are doing post-mortem or root cause analysis? Because today, a lot of times what happens is people don't want to have the same issues repeated again, right? We want to have a permanent fix, and you reduce the likelihood of incidents happening again. I talk with a lot of clients, and clients ask me, Suresh, we have all this sophisticated monitoring, application monitoring, infrastructure monitoring. Can we have zero incidents, right? Because it's a wish list. So the question is really about, even if you're not able to reduce eliminate entire incidents, you can reduce the incoming incidents. So focus on fixing it permanently rather than just back and forth. Then we need to look at testing. And this is a big problem in a lot of companies. The test automation bit is going to be super important in how we see this through. And capacity, because today we are talking about 100,000 users to a million users. How can you even deal with that situation, right? We all know about what's happening in our IRCTC website, right? The Indian Railways booking, right? Where we have a Tatkal booking, right? And today what's happening is that they are losing it because you have the flights which are much more economical and they have a lot more options. So sometimes the Indian Railways will also have to step up the game towards reliability in order to get more revenue stream coming across, and then start focusing on our development CI/CD pipelines across. So I think it's very important, as you start to look at the overall reliability hierarchy, how are we doing in all these levels, right? What are the teams? How are they getting involved? What's your current stack looking like? Because that will give you a very good understanding about how we need to step up the game from the bottom to top. Okay. So that's a very important aspect for you to start thinking about. Reliability is just not about monitoring alone. It requires so many other steps that to move in that direction. So what are some of the key concepts? So in a world of earlier, you all are familiar with service management. We have contractual obligations signed with service level agreements, right? There is an agreed set of services that you promise to give as part of your service level agreements. Now we have to shift gears to service level objectives, right? Service level objectives is something which is based on customer experience. So for example, if your priority one incident is, let's say, 4 hours, I might want to have my SLOs to 3 hours, because I know that you will fulfill. In fact, today a lot of companies around the world are able to meet SLAs, but we need to go even beyond, right? So we are trying to reduce or improvise based on our experience to do SLOs, and SLIs are the areas that will measure those targets, right? So it could be a response time, it could be a resolution time, it could be latency. All of those parameters are being brought in across. So SLI will tell you every month how are you performing. SLO will tell you whether you have reached or not. SLA is a bare minimum. So I call this as service level agreements are hygiene factor, right? So everybody will have SLA in place, but we need to step up the game towards service level objectives, because it's changing over a period of time based on user experience, right? So service level agreements is a definitive business contract between the service provider and the customer. So if there is a loss of service, it could yield towards a penalty, right? And an SLA breach means that you will have to compensate something. Today, I'm telling you, across in my 22 years, I've seen almost 99.999% companies are delivering on SLA, but we have this watermelon syndrome. You know this watermelon syndrome? Everything looks green outside. The dashboards of SLAs look green, but the moment I open the watermelon, it's bleeding red, right? The customer is simply bleeding. So I think this is a good time for us to shift gears towards service level objectives, because we are constantly looking at how I can improve my SLA. And by the way, if you really take this seriously, over a period of time, your SLOs will become your new SLAs. That is where I think you will have a huge advantage with your competitors, because you're not just restricting to what your customers are asking, you are starting a level above because of your experience doing that. So it's a worth pursuit towards service level objectives. So service level indicator is basically the quantifiable measure, whether it's throughput, your latency to measure, and then report it on a monthly basis. Another important principle in site reliability engineering is to reduce toil. A lot of times today we have manual effort. We spend way too much time on fixing issues. Some of things are not automated. There are certain things which are very focused on report generation manually, and it takes a lot of time. So as a site reliability engineer, you need to spend 50% of the time for development activities and 50% time only spent on break fixes. Now, this is nirvana, right? In a typical world, the operations team is inundated with incidents that they cannot be able to solve it overall. So the question really is about understanding how can I do this better? So should we re-engineering your process? Are we trying to look at automation? Are we looking at self-service part? The intent is to spend less amount of time and focus on things that matter the most, right? A lot of times I think with AOps, with Chat GPT and other stuff happens, we are trying to reprioritize. Am I spending the most important time today? Is it worth the effort? Because if we spend so much time on task of tactical things, you will not be able to focus on things that really matters, right? So start thinking about reducing technical debt, because as a DevOps engineer, you would know that your code is not optimized. And if it's not optimized, it's going to take so much effort to work on fixes and reprioritization, right? So a very important part to reduce the toil element of it. There is another question that people ask more often that I wanted to cover is, what's the relationship with DevOps and SRE? At one end, I told you DevOps is focusing on velocity and stability, which is managing, while site reliability engineering is focusing on reliability and resilience. Almost both of them are like together, right? If you look at the Google's book, it says SRE is a class that implements DevOps in post-production, right? So they still have the same philosophy of reducing organization silos. Accept failure is normal, which means we need to do some level of experimentation. That's why we have this concept of error budget that will allow you to go through that more. Implement gradual changes, slow gradual changes, tool and automation. I just talked about reducing toil, and measure everything. This is where we start focusing on monitoring and observability. So DevOps and SRE are like twin sisters, right? They complement each other. So it's not that you cannot do SRE. And remember, the more matured you are in DevOps, then you can start getting into SRE. So SRE and DevOps needs to go hand in hand overall to achieve that real business outcomes, right? Now, I wanted to ask you this question. If I call up the service desk and I ask them, hey, you know what? I'm not able to access my mailbox, right? I'm not able to send or receive emails. Something is broken. Then what do? You give a ticket and give you a ticket number and say that, okay, your ticket number is XYZ, and you start working on the ticket as part of a workaround or a permanent fix. Now, what happens? You don't worry about what's happening to the employee. Are they able to access the systems? What are they going to do until you fix this issue? It is of no concern to you, right? You're only focusing on response time, which is from open to work in progress, or resolution time, which is open to completed. Does anybody care about the interim stage from moment over time? That, I think, is the biggest worry in many organizations, because people are not concerned about experience. And that's where I think the concept of SLO emerges. We are not just worried about our deliverables. I know a lot of times we put the ticket into on hold status because we are waiting for a confirmation from customer. Think yourself putting into the shoes of the customer. How would the customer perceive things? And that's the way that you need to start driving this whole conversation to be more meaningfully applying on that part, right? So the world is changing. So what I want you to do is moving from reactive to proactive to predictive. What do you mean by that? In a typical world, your reactive was incident management, the way that we saw incident management to be applied. The next one is about proactive, which I think you have some level of event monitoring in place. But I think you need to get into predictiveness. How likely are you able to predict a particular incident would happen? That's where the world of AOps starts to come over. So we are shifting gears, right? So reactive and proactive is said and done, right? The world is now moving towards predictiveness, for which I think we need to look at observability, we need to look at AOps, And that will give us this whole dimension of shifting gears towards becoming more a predictive organizations part of it, right? So a quick case study of if I want you to do, and we want to give enough amount of value and meat for you in this conference, I picked up one scenario that if you are implementing SRE, how are you going to go about doing it? Is first start to understand the why, because I talk a lot of times, if you don't understand the why, then your how doesn't work, right? So understand why are you doing SRE at the first place? Is it your customer experience? Is it your performance issues? Is it part of reliability? Why on the earth do we do it, right? And what are your goals? Because you need to talk with your leadership team to understand what are my goals? Am I going to make my deployments easier? Am I focused on improving my uptime or availability? Do I need to improve my visibility across my app performance? Because we have so much different applications distributed across. Are we going to look at service level indicators and service level objectives? Am I going to increase my speed or risk, eliminate toil? So you need to look at that. At a phase one, you need to start looking at your pipeline, right? We already talked about your CI/CD pipeline. Make that optimized because that's the bare minimum that I want you to expect to do it. Phase two, look at your monitoring, and Yogesh is going to give you a hands-on demo on that particular part of Prometheus, and we is going to also talk about the way of tools that will help you to understand monitoring aspect of it. Then you do postmortem, looking at logging mechanisms, looking at SLOs. A lot of changes are also happened on infrastructure as a code, configuration as a code, and then start doing on the deployment part of it. So it could be small canary deployments, it could be large scale implementations, it could be your APM tools, and finally chaos engineering, right? Because today, if reliability is a first class citizen, chaos engineering is focusing on anti-fragility testing, right? If you know chaos engineering, it's like allowing a monkey, in fact, a drunken monkey, to go to a data center. What will it do? It will chew the cables and throw it off. From there, you start making sure that we're able to get back to normalcy. So the chaos engineering and uh, BCPDR varies in the sense that the BCPDR is a more of a tabletop test, whereas chaos engineering, you don't even know what will happen. And that's how we need to do it. So what are your skills and competencies that are so important? And if you and we will share the link. I have created a Q&A series for all the questions that are commonly asked by SREs, DevSecOps, DevOps, Agile folks about some of the skills and competencies that you need to build to become a SRE. And what I've seen is, as I started to look at some of those people who I've interviewed, I also do an SRE practitioner series, inviting practitioners who share real world experiences. I found out that one of the most important characteristics is about problem solving skills, right? If you don't enjoy problem solving skills, you should never be an SRE, number one. Number two, you should be willing to spend extra time to be a good collaborator, because a lot of times I don't think people, you cannot do individually because it's a distributed system. Some things will break here and there. So how do you focus on getting that insights? That's going to be important. You need to be extremely technically sound, right? So you should have skills on microservices. You should have skills on containers. You should have skills on one of the programming languages, because without that, you cannot be a full-blown SRE. Remember, SRE has to understand the end-to-end value chain. So understanding these nuances will put you into that particular aspect of working towards that model. The next aspect that I also think is about a strong understanding about architecture, right? So could be on cloud, it's about looking at lift and shift or refactoring or re-architecting. What is the kind of cloud adoption model that you're going to do? Because many of the organizations that we are serving are moving into an application modernization stack. So if you don't have skills around cloud and automation part of it, it's going to be difficult, because as an SRE, you also have to write your own script and coding part of it, right? The other aspect of site reliability engineering skill, which is more important from my perspective, is focusing on the aspect of anti-fragility, right? So ability to understand like chaos engineering, tools where we can experiment a little bit. And it could be a very good communicator. A lot of times I think people in IT are not great communicators. So we need to really start focusing on communicating the right level of information to the right people. Because I've been in a developer role, tester role, QA role, operations role, and a consultant role. So you can start connecting the whole dot. So that's going to be important aspect of it. And your domain knowledge. If it's going to be your insurance, if it's going to be your financial services, if it's going to be telecom, your domain knowledge is also going to be super critical aspect. So these are some of the skills, but I will strongly recommend you can Google Q&A series with Suresh GP. You will have a whole lot of episodes that you can subscribe to. It's free. It's about 5 minutes that you can get a lot more information on all these topics. Now, why is IT professionals seeing rising demand for SREs? We were interviewed as global ambassadors of the DevOps Institute, and I gave some feedback. But if you really talk about why site reliability engineering is getting a lot more demand these days, is a lot of these performance bottlenecks that we talk about is trying to be addressed, because now we look at reliability from the left to right. Um, because you have a distributed working environment, you have third-party systems, you have monolithic applications, you have microservices, you have proprietary systems, open source tools. So getting feedback, what I call as telemetry, feedback, observability becomes very difficult, right? So we need to have a single pane of glass that gets you an end-to-end view from the code commit to deploy. And we're also seeing a lot of synergy towards DevOps cannot just do it fully, right? We need SRE roles to be embedded on that. And we are still evolving to inculcate the learnings with development and operations team, because when I talk with a lot of development teams, they don't have idea about IT service management. I asked the IT service management time, do you know about DevOps? They don't know it. But how are they going to work together? So bringing in that level of cross-functional knowledge and competencies are going to be important, because today we are extremely siloed, either as a product level or an application level. And SRE is becoming a lot more demand at the marketplace. And we believe that reliable service depends on having good world-class SREs in place. So a couple of more slides before I kind of wrap it up is we did this. This is available as a article about 8 reasons site reliability engineers is one of most demand. So they interviewed me. So one of my response to them is the demand to perform continuing reliability analysis of existing infrastructure by focusing on removing performance bottleneck, right? Because what I've seen is over the past few years, site reliability engineering teams have reduced significant amount of toil, because that is freeing up some of the time to focus on most important activity, reducing a technical debt and improving customer experience, right? So site reliability engineering has been one of the only approach to derive something very valuable in production, where you also relook at calibrating your design development for sustainable business value. So I hope you are now convinced that there is a demand for site reliability engineering, and the investment of time and effort in this particular space is going to be substantially beneficial for you to take advantage of it. So what does the career progression look like? I get this question a lot, what kind of salaries can I expect if I become an SRE? Because that's the $1 million question that I have. So I got a report from the 2022 report that says that the average starting salary for an entry level site reliability engineering with less than 1 year of experience is about $82,000, right? This is in US dollars. And the lowest salary was about $77,000, right? And if you had about 4 years of experience, you get about $104,000. A mid-career, about 9 years, would about 122K. About 10 to 19 years of experience, which is basically you should have done the work of development, your operations, your service management, your architecture and other stuff. You have a broader understanding about the whole gamut. You're looking about at the 138K. And people who are really at the senior late career, right? So 20 plus experience, you can get easily about 150K, significantly higher than the market average. So the stat says it is promising. And I know for sure they come to Top Solutions when we do a lot of this training and coaching, and they say, can you recommend people to be deployed into our projects? Because there's a huge demand for SREs and they are having a lot of positions open. So if you build up your career with all your strong skills that I talked about, and you will just gain insights to making it really a worthwhile experience, right? So what's your career progression look like? There are various different paths. I've just picked up one path that probably will give you a little bit of a path of how you can navigate through. So you could be a product manager, you could be an engineering manager, you want to be a site reliability engineer. Decide on how you want to do it. Do you want to do an SRE individual role? For a lot of our clients that we are doing, we are looking at SRE manager, we are looking at SRE engineer, we are looking at SRE practitioner, we are looking at evangelist. So it depends on what's your core interest to build it. And typically, companies will have a function or a COE of an SRE that will carve out the path of doing it. And some people become distinguished engineers, product directors. It's up to you, right? But there is a huge opportunity in splitting up the whole scale and then seeing how we can make that really a worthwhile experience, right? So what are the options for you as an SRE? You can be an embedded SRE, which means as an SRE, you get embedded in the product teams that you're working, right? So it could be core banking, financial banking. It could be new products. It could be embedded. It could be distributed, right? Depending on the way that I could have a shared SRE pool. So depending on the need of the work to be done, I can allocate those SREs to the specific engagements. You can focus on tool only specific SREs or also infrastructure. So you will see both all these options available. It depends on what's your organization's operating model. Based on that, you can find out how these SREs will fit in overall to the scheme of things. So my final two is that if you want to have resources, we thought we will give you some resources. We are delivering some of these workshops called 2 days of Site Reliability Engineering Foundation workshop, which I have seen people get a lot more benefits of 2 days that we cover all these key elements, which is the foundation level aspects that we cover. And then we go into the SRE practitioner, which I already told that I'm one of the co-authors, which is a 3-day course. And for me, a lot of people who have gone through our Site Reliability Engineering Foundation course and practitioner course have got immense value in seeing that this has been so helpful for them, not only to implement that at their workplace, but also help them advance in their career progression. So if you are keen, interested, Thinknyx will give you a feedback link and form, and you can post and you can stay in touch where we will keep you notified about these programs as you want to develop and enhance your career for yourself and for your organizations in that as